The same action, however, as a noumenon, is not under the rule of that which happens in myself, and which must be represented through another determining reason and connection, except in a good will. Their objective necessity, which is a freedom from physical causes, is at the same time a subjective one. In the case of an evil will, on the other hand, since it is will after all and not nature, all its actions are objectively impossible and subjectively contingent. Because this contingency is the condition under which an objective law, in whose regard an action can be represented as evil, can be sought. And in itself evil action, which therefore should not be done, is evil precisely because we do it without an objectively sufficient reason, and the will is evil because subjectively it is not determined through the very same rule. Immanuel Kant. I've spent the last several weeks now to explain in several lectures what the morally good is to Kant. I explained what the moral law, what the categorical imperative dictates. It dictates for us to only act according to a maxim through which we could want for it to become a universal law. That is, we should base our actions on a principle that is fit to become a universal principle. In other words, we should act in a manner that would be possible for everyone to act in that manner and for that to work. Or also, you could say we should have reverence for humanity, that is not for the individual human as he happens to be, including with his feelings, with his sensitivities, but rather we should have reverence for humanity as such, that is for rationality, for autonomy, and we should never use humanity as just a means for our ends, for our purposes, but treat it as a purpose in itself. Or thirdly, we should act as part of a universal kingdom of purposes that we inhabit with all other rational beings, and we should act as if our will were to be not just a member of that kingdom of purposes, but as if through our will we would give the law for that kingdom. And we should give such laws that would work, that would create a harmonious kingdom of purposes between all rational beings. And I explained how these actions that the moral law dictates, doing those actions is not enough. You can have legality in your actions without having morality in your will. I explained that to Kant what matters is not the actions as such and also not the consequences, it is the good will. It is that the good actions are done for the right reasons, not out of compassion, out of a good heart, but out of character, out of a truly good will, which will create in us a feeling of reverence for the moral law and for the law-giving humanity. And with all of that, that's all fine, but there's one important piece missing still, and that is the question of evil. Moral philosophy has not just to deal with what is good, but also has to answer the question what is evil, or also how come there even is evil. What does it mean for people to be evil? Why are people evil? Why do they act against the moral law? What is the origin of that evil? And in the history of philosophy, there have generally been two different positions. The position that evil is something positive, and the position that evil is something negative. And of course, here in the scholarly language, positive and negative doesn't mean what it means in everyday language. It doesn't mean good or bad. So a positive evil is not a good evil, of course. That would be a contradiction in itself. But rather, positive means that we posit something, that there really is something of its own. And negative would mean that there's just a lack of something, right? Think of having some sickness like COVID, for example. When you're positive, that doesn't mean that it's a good thing. It's probably a better thing to be negative in this case, but it means that COVID is actually there in your body. So, theories of a negative evil would claim that there really is no evil as such. There is no evil principle that is opposed to the good principle. Rather, evil is just a privation. It's just a lack of goodness. Kind of like how there is no cold as opposed to warmth, but rather, or no darkness as opposed to light. Like there's no positive darkness, right? There's no body that emits darkness like a body like the sun may emit light, but rather darkness or coldness are just lack of light, lack of warmth. And the same would be true for evil, being a lack of good. While the other position would claim, no, there is a positive evil. There is there's an evil principle opposed to the good principle, like there's a devil opposed to God or whatever. And in this old discussion, Kant says it's not enough to say that evil is just a privation, just a lack of goodness. Because if goodness is a positive principle, if it really is something, then it can only be opposed by something, by another positive principle. Goodness, after all, to Kant means having a good will. And the will, I explained all of that in previous lectures, particularly the lecture on the good will and the good deeds. The will is just practical reason. So any creature which has reason, which has practical reason, would have to have a good will, would therefore be a good being. And if we only had this, if we only had practical reason, if we were pure rational beings, such as God is, then we would be good. There could be no lack of goodwill. If there was nothing opposed to the goodwill, there would only be the goodwill, and we would be fully good. We would not even be capable of doing anything evil or wanting anything evil. So there must be something, some positive principle opposed to this positive principle of goodness, Kant says. The question now is, of course, what is that? And there seem to be two candidates. There seem to be two possibilities that again have been suggested in the history of philosophy. One possibility would be to say, okay, like goodness is based on a good will, evilness is based on an evil will. People are evil because they have an evil will. This, however, Kant says, is not possible. Why is it not possible? Well, what would an evil will mean? An evil will, that would mean truly the opposite of a good will. So, what is a good will? I explained that in the lecture on the good will. To Kant, the good will is the will that wants what is good simply because it is good. So, not for any other reasons. Right? If I want to save someone's life who's about to die, but that someone happens to be my beloved wife or my beloved brother, and I want to save that person out of my love. But if it was a stranger, I wouldn't want to save that person. Then my action may have legality, that is, it may be in accordance with the moral law, but I'm not doing it for moral reasons. Only if I want to save that person's life because it is the right thing to do and for no other reason, only then am I good. So the goodwill is a completely supersensual principle. There is nothing sensual about it because once again, it is pure practical reason. And we have goodwill if we don't let our sensuality, our sensual desires dictate, but rather we let practical reason dictate. Meaning, we are willing, if it comes down to that, if that is necessary in a certain situation, to act in spite of our sensual desires, to even act against them, to even sacrifice our sensual desires and our sensual well-being, to even sacrifice our life if it need be, simply because it is the right thing to do. So that would mean that an evil will is not just a will that wants to do something that is evil, but rather it would be a will that wants to do something that is evil for the sake of it being evil. In other words, it would also be a supersensual principle. It would also mean that you rise above your sensual desires. I mean, usually when people do evil, it's not necessarily that they actively want to do evil and to harm people. It's that they are selfish. They want their own gain and they don't care that it harms others. Like, he who wants to steal probably usually doesn't steal just to harm the person he steals from. I mean, if that was the case, he could steal and then throw the stolen money away, throw it into the river. No, he does it for his own gain. He probably wouldn't steal if he were just gifted that money, if he won the lottery. So it's not that he wants to harm that person, it's just that he doesn't care if in pursuing his own goals he's harming another person. Likewise, the rapist might not rape for the sake of hurting someone. He just wants to get off. He does it out of lust, maybe. And it is just that he doesn't care if him getting off causes harm to others. So that is not an evil will as such. That is certainly a lack of goodwill. That certainly means not caring if doing what you sensually desire harms others. That is only caring for whatever benefits you, but precisely for that reason, since you care about what benefits you, not about evilness as such, it's not an evil will. An evil will, once again, would want evil just for its own sake, and would, just like a good will is ready to sacrifice its own well-being for goodness, an evil will would be willing to go out of its way to sacrifice its own well-being, maybe even if its life, if it had to, for the sake of evilness. And such an evil will, Kant says, is too much. That cannot be ascribed to humans. That would not be a human will. That would be a devil's will. I will mention that Kant does say there are three vices that he calls devilish vices amongst human beings. Those are ungratefulness, envy, and Schadenfreude or malice. And he calls them devilish vices because they really seem to be about just harming someone else for its own sake, even though you don't benefit from it, right? Like other vices, um, like greed. Sure, when you are greedy, you might harm others in the process. You might steal from others, or you might be stingy and not give to others when you should. Um, but that is really still a vice that benefits yourself. You do it for your own gain because you want to get money or to keep your money. But when you have, let's say, Schadenfreude, so somebody else gets harmed and you are happy about that, it really doesn't benefit you. It just harms the other person. So that seems to be a devil-like vice. But even those three vices, Kant would say, only seem to be devilish. They can be psychologically explained. It is about some sort of gain after all. I will get into that at a later point when I get to Kant's anthropology. But in general, such a devilish will cannot be ascribed to humans. And I will mention just in passing that it can also not be ascribed to the devil. Kant is not just saying that an evil will cannot be a thing in human beings, it cannot be a thing at all. Because, once again, what is the will? The will is practical reason. Now, what does the good will want? I discussed it in the lecture on the moral law and the categorical imperative. That the categorical imperative is really just about being consistent, being in unity with yourself, not self-contradicting. I said there it's really just a principle, the logical principle of contradiction applied to the practical, applied to action, right? It is about not doing one thing and thereby claiming that it is allowed, and then in another situation not wanting the same thing to be allowed, like murdering somebody and then not wanting to get murdered yourself. So really, the goodwill is just practical reason in concord with itself. And Kant says that no power, no force in the world can ever be in contradiction with itself. It cannot go against itself. The only way there can be a contradiction is if two forces sort of collide. Right? The example is always if you throw something like a stone, then there is the force of your throwing, and there is the force of gravity pulling it down again, which is precisely while the stone will fly for a moment and then come down back to earth. But if there was just one power, if there was just gravity, it would stay on the earth. And if there was just you throwing it without the pull of gravity, it would just keep flying. So that means that if you had just a will, pure practical reason, it would necessarily be a good will. It cannot be an evil will. An evil will, Kant says, would really be the will that makes it its principle to act without principle, which is clearly a contradiction in itself. It would be the maxim to have no maxims. that's not possible. So that's precisely the reason why Kant says that a pure that a pure rational being like God uh, has to have a good will. He can only be good and nothing else. Um, and God is the only pure rational being. In Kant, that's not always so obvious. Fichte later made it more obvious. But even in Kant, there are certain passages where he basically says it, and even the others where he doesn't say it, where it seems that there could be many pure rational beings. If you think it through, there can't be. I mean, um, sensuality is being limited. So a pure rational being would be a limitless being. And there can, of course, only be one limitless being. Otherwise, if there were two, they would both have to be limited. The one would have to end where the other begins. So it can only be God. That means that doesn't necessarily mean that there can't be some sort of higher beings as compared to humans. Beings that we would maybe consider spiritual beings, beings such as angels. It just means that they are not pure rational beings. They too would have to have some sort of sensuality. Maybe they would have a more ethereal body made of light or whatever, of spiritual matter, but they would still have to have some sort of body. So therefore, you can, if you want, of course, believe in some sort of devil. You can believe that there's Lucifer, this somehow evil spiritual being causing mayhem. But you would have to assume that even he doesn't have a pure evil will. And I mean, I would say that in the tradition that has at least been unconsciously felt, because usually people have ascribed some sort of sensual drives to the devil to explain his evil actions. They have said that the devil has arrogance, hubris, lust for power, wanting to replace God, basically. Or they have said that the devil has envy, be it for God or be it for the human being, right? Like the Quran says that he didn't want to bow down to Adam, saying, "Oh, he's made of earth, of dirt. I'm made of fire, so I'm better than him." Um, those would still be sensual drives, maybe not such base drives such as lust or gluttony, but still it would mean that the devil is not doing evil just for the sake of doing evil, um, but in some way for his own gain, out of his envy or out of his lust for power or whatever. And this would also mean, if you think this through, if the devil, if there even was such a thing, does not have a pure evil will, then the only logical conclusion would be that the devil doesn't have to be evil, that the devil too could aufklär himself, could become good, that the devil too could find salvation, which would be what the church father Origenes, for example, claimed, that in the end, everyone, even the devil, has to be saved. But be that as it may, this is the reason why, according to Kant, there cannot be an evil will, not just in human beings, but not at all. So how then to explain evil? What then would be the principle that opposes the good principle of the good will? Well, the other suggestion would be that it would be our sensuality, right? That our sensual drives, so to say, pull us uh, into another direction, away from what would be good, what we should do. So, someone, let's say, wants to be faithful in marriage, but his lust is stronger, or he wants to help those in need, and if he lives in Nazi time, he wants to help the Jew who seeks refuge. But then his sense of self-preservation and his fear is stronger, and so he doesn't help. Well, this position is true in some sense, in the sense that without sensuality we could not be evil. Sure, once again, God as a pure rational being only has the goodwill, and since no force can contradict itself, so since the will cannot be in contradiction with itself, since it cannot want evil, and since there is nothing else besides the goodwill, so there is nothing else that could make God want anything else, that could make God go against what he wants. He cannot want evil, he can only want good. Um, Only a being which doesn't only have the will, but which has sensual drives, and those drives, as driving springs, can determine that being's choice to pick illegal actions, actions that are against the moral law. Only such a being is capable of evil. That much is true. But this position that it is sensuality pulling us away from what is good, that would basically be the Christian position, right? So that position is very, very ingrained in us because it has reigned over us in the West for 2000 years at least. Um, it's this old Christian opinion that to be good, you have to abstain. You have to. Goodness is about asceticism, right? It's about the death of the flesh. And the devil is the one who offers luxury and wealth and riches and lust and gluttony and power. So you have to withstand that, and you have to flee the devil, and you have to flee the pleasures of the world that could ensnare you, and you have to go into the desert as a hermit, or you have to go into the monastery as a monk, and you have to whip yourself, you have to fast, to kill off the flesh and the fleshly desires. And this went really far. People nowadays have largely forgotten, because we are so disconnected from, at least consciously, from that Christian tradition. People don't really know how far this went, but you just have to read some medieval legends of saints to see that many of those saints, they were not considered saints because they did such good holy deeds, because they helped those in need or whatever, they gave to the poor. Sure, there's some of that too, but really lots of them are just considered saints because they abstained from all, and I mean all, pleasures. um, Like there are stories where some saint uh, fasted so much that he or she um, couldn't even get up anymore out of weakness. They were just lying around in their cell in the monastery, and that is considered very saintly. That is considered holy. That they didn't eat at all. That they made themselves completely useless. So this this old Christian tradition would say, as an explanation for evil, that yes, as the Bible says, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So the flesh pulls the spirit down, so to say. And as Nietzsche has shown, in spite of all the secularization, we are still very much in that Christian tradition. We may have become theoretical atheists, rejecting the Christian dogma in theory, but practically, without realizing, in their values, in their judgments, in their outlook on life, people are still very much influenced by this. Um, so this is still how we often look at good and evil, saying that the desires, the flesh, they just were stronger. Um, they just pulled me away from my good intentions. And this doesn't even just go for morality. This even starts in the pragmatic realm. So where it's not about what is morally good, but what is good in the sense of useful. So, for example, when it comes to health, right? People will say, "Oh, I have the intention of eating more healthy, eating less sweet stuff or less fat stuff." Or I have the intention to do sports and to work out, or I have the intention to stop smoking, but I can't bring myself to do it. My desires are stronger. I always end up doing it again. This position, for the longest time, seems to also have been Kant's position. Even his main works on moral philosophy, the groundwork to the metaphysics of morals and the critique of practical reason, uh, they can still be read in that way. Only very late, like about 10 years before his death, in his religion in the bounds of reason, um, only there he shifted his position and realized that that previous position wasn't enough. Because this position, Fichte would later say that it is on the second level of consciousness. I can't get into that too much here without this turning into a Fichte lecture, but Fichte describes 5 levels of consciousness that people can have, like the consciousness of nature, then second, the consciousness of lower morality, or of right, of justice, then third, consciousness of higher morality, fourth, the consciousness of religion, and then lastly, the consciousness of philosophy or of science. And it is only the second level where you believe that there is nature. Like the first level is just focused on nature and doesn't care about morality, just does his whatever his nature, his desires demand. And then in the second level, you realize that there is a moral law that you should follow, that should have precedent over your natural desires, but you still believe that all there is otherwise is nature with your sensual desires included. And so those two now oppose each other. And so you are now of the opinion that it is about suppressing your nature to a degree, doing some sort of asceticism, some sort of abstaining, and forcing yourself to rather follow the law. And now it could, of course, happen that this doesn't work, that your nature is stronger. But this position, this can't be it, both for theoretical and for practical reasons. If we look at it just theoretically, what is claimed here is that there's some sort of tug of war going on between the sensual desires on the one hand and reason, practical reason, the goodwill on the other hand. And then either one side or the other side manages to pull more strongly and to win, right? That is what is meant, apparently, when the Bible speaks of the spirit being willing but the flesh being weak. But if you think about it, sensuality and rationality are two completely different things of completely different qualities, so they cannot interact directly. I mean, let's stay with the analogy. How could a body, a physical body, and a spirit play tug of war together? The body can pull as much as he wants. He won't be able to pull the spirit one bit. The largest, the strongest body in the world that could be able to move every other body, to either push or pull any other body, it would not be able to push or pull even the weakest of spirits. The body would just pass through the spirit without affecting him. So theoretically, it's not possible that our sensuality is stronger than our reason, because it simply is a different thing. It doesn't affect reason. It's of course possible that one sensual desire is stronger than another sensual desire, right? Like, let's say a house burns down and my child is inside that house, and I'm afraid and I have the desire to keep living. I have self-preservation, but my love and care for my child is stronger, so I run into the flames to save the child. Sure, that is possible, because sensual desires, they belong to the same species, so to say. So of course one can be stronger, one can be weaker than the other, but they cannot be stronger or weaker than reason, which is of a completely different species. But also, we can reject this position on practical grounds. Because if this was true, if people did evil not because they want to, but just because they have this strong sensuality that pulls them away from what would be good, then we could not judge them for that. They would not be guilty, they would not be responsible. Rather, we would even have to pity the evil person and say, oh, that poor guy, it's too bad he has this strong sensuality, these strong desires. Good thing my desires are less strong. Like, the person with an ill temper, if he gets angry and yells at you, insults you, maybe even attacks you, beats you up, he would be excused. He could just say, oh, I didn't want to do that. It just so happens that I have this very ill temper and I just lost control of myself, right? Or the lustful person, or let's say once again, the pedophile who rapes a child, you could just say, oh, I didn't want to do that, I know it's wrong, but my lust just got the better of me. My desires, my sexual desires, they were too strong, I couldn't help it. Of course, the only right answer if someone says something like that would be, okay, maybe you are right, maybe you have very strong desires, but still, that's no excuse. You cannot say, I just couldn't help it, I just lost control of myself. You ought to control yourself. And as I explained in the lecture on Do We Have Free Will, this ought implies a can. If we can tell somebody, or if we can tell ourselves, you are under the moral law, you ought to act differently from what you may desire, then that implies that you can act differently, no matter how strong the desire is. As long as we can tell somebody you ought not to follow that desire, we are thereby confirming that he still has the freedom to act in a different manner. So, even on practical grounds, this doesn't work. If we really were to believe that the evil just comes out of too strong desires that people cannot control, it would mean believing that people are not free and therefore not responsibility anymore. Then they would stop being moral beings and they would just be like animals. Like an animal really does follow its desires, its instincts, and therefore is not responsible, right? Nobody blames a lion for attacking you, for biting you, or whatever. Aufklärung is about freedom. Aufklärung is about considering people to be perpetrators and not victims. And hence, out of the Aufklärung spirit of his philosophy, of his thinking, Kant, in the last years of his life, once again in his book, The Religion and the Bounds of Mere Reason, comes to a different position about evil. Kant would say our faculty of choice chooses what actions we do, and it doesn't choose randomly. It is determined in its choices by driving springs. I discussed this further in the lecture on the faculty of desiring and on choice and the will. And now those driving springs that determine our choice, they can either be sensual drives. And those are not bad, not evil per se. Kant's morality is not one of self-denial. It's not one that is life negating and pleasure negating. Kant would say it's okay to seek out pleasures as long as you do it in a moral manner. Like you can enjoy food, you just shouldn't steal it. You can enjoy sex, you just shouldn't rape. He would even say that those sensual drives, they have their place in nature, and they are even necessary and good things for sensual creatures such as we are. Like it's good that we can be hungry because we do need food to survive, right? If we didn't feel hunger, we would probably starve. So you should listen to that sensual drive of hunger and you should eat. But then the other driving spring that can drive our choice can be the moral feeling of reverence, which I discussed in a previous lecture. If we have the goodwill, it means we have reverence for the moral law, and out of that reverence, we will do whatever the moral law dictates. Now the issue is that both of those can collide in some instances. They don't have to. They can even align, like it may be that the moral law dictates that I help a person in danger, and I also happen to love that person, so I also have a sensual drive to help that person. But they can, of course, collide. There can be situations where my sensual drive and my moral duty are in contradiction with one another. And now the question is, what is my maxim? So, what is the subjective principle that I gave myself according to which I make my choices? And my maxim can be that if there's a collision, the moral law takes precedence, the moral law comes first. I will do my duty even if I have to go against my sensual drives, then I'm good. Or my maxim can be, I always want to do whatever is to my advantage, even if it goes against the moral law. If doing the moral law can align with whatever my sensual desires are, then okay, I may also follow the moral law. But when they collide, I will rather follow my sensual desires rather than the moral law. And if that is your maxim, then you are evil. So it's not the sensual drive as such that makes you be evil. Rather, before that, there needs to already be a decision to follow that drive rather than following the moral law. So it's that willingness, that readiness to rather go with whatever is to your personal advantage that is the root of evil. And here again, you can remember what I said in the lecture on the goodwill and the good deeds, that it really is not about the deeds, the actions as such, it is about our will. What specific actions we do is really not our decision so much as it is determined by the circumstances, like what kind of person am I, what genes do I have, what desires, what temper, how was I raised, what habits have I built, what is the specific situation into which life has thrown me. And so I might be an action which is very evil and causing great harm, or I might be doing an action which is just a very small offense and causing little harm. But that is not the point. At the root, in both cases, I can be equally evil. It's just the circumstances that made me act more on it or less on it. Like if my maxim is that I will always go with my advantage, even if it may harm others, then in some situation, some company, some tourist company might offer a discount for some flight, and I will just take that flight because it's cheap, without thinking about what it does to the climate. And in another situation, I might be living in the Nazi times, and my Jewish neighbor may be deported, and the furniture of that neighbor is now sold at a cheap price, and rather than protest, I use this opportunity to get the good furniture for a good price. I didn't pick these circumstances, but what I did pick is a priori how I would react to these circumstances. What I did pick is that I would go with my advantage, no matter whether others and their rights are harmed or not. And picking this, that is what is evil at the root, what is radically evil. So Kant would say it's not that we have that we do evil actions out of our inclinations that incline us towards evil. but rather this only comes second. What comes first, what is the actual radical evil, is that we decide to follow our inclinations rather than the moral law, and that decision itself cannot be something that our sensual inclinations have inclined us to do, because that would be a circle, right? It's the decision to even listen to those inclinations. So the inclinations, or listening to the inclinations, cannot have happened before that decision, because only through that decision did we start to listen to them. I mean, why did you pick this evil maxim to always do whatever is to your advantage? Because it was the most advantageous maxim? Because it was more to your advantage to pick this maxim rather than the maxim to always do your moral duty? Again, that's a circle. Only once you picked it did you make the decision, okay, my advantage matters to me. I will pick whatever has the biggest advantage. So that picking itself cannot be explained by the fact that it was most advantageous. And this is exactly why Kant calls this a radical evil. It's an evil that is not superficial, and it's not about how big or how small the evil is. Like the actual actions that come from it may be big and very harmful, or they will maybe small and not so harmful. But it is an evil that is deep, an evil that is at the root, because this is an evil that cannot be excused in any way. That cannot be excused by your weakness. Being weak in the face of your strong sensual desires or whatever, because it is the decision to even make excuses for not doing good, because it is the decision to even be weak in the first place, to even give your desires the power over yourself. And this is why Kant famously speaks of a radical evil, which is a term that is often misunderstood, especially nowadays, because we don't really know what the word radical means. Radical nowadays is unfortunately used as a synonym for extreme. They are used more or less interchangeably, which is completely wrong. Radical and extreme have nothing to do with one another. Extreme means far outside, far from the center. But that could still be superficial. You can be at the surface and still far away from the center. Radical, on the other way, comes from the Latin word radix, which means root. So radical is that which is basically the opposite of the superficial, of the shallow, right? The radical, like the root, is deep in the ground. It is literally the root of something. So that is why it annoys me when people speak of, like, for example, political radicalism, which is usually not radicalism but extremism. Like, there is no such thing as a radical right. It's even a contradictio in adjecto, right? Those right-wingers, they are terribly superficial. They might be extremists, they might be very extreme in their views or even in their actions, like if they are terrorists or whatever, but they are certainly not radical. The same, of course, goes for the so-called radical left, or when there's talk of radical fundamentalists, like when people call the Taliban or the Daesh radical, they are not radical. There's nothing radical about them. They might be extremists. They might have extreme views and do extreme deeds, but that's not the same as being radical. It's a shame indeed that this wonderful word has gotten such a bad reputation, such a bad connotation. As Hannah Arendt says, it should be the good which is the most radical, which has the most depth. Um, I would say that Aufklärung is radical, and being unaufklärt is by necessity the opposite of being radical. It is about being superficial. But back to evil. So when Kant says radical evil, he's not talking of extreme evil. Like he wouldn't say that the evil of the Nazis committing genocide is really more radical than the evil of someone losing his temper and yelling at you, or of someone stealing a towel in a hotel. It is certainly by far more extreme, but that doesn't make it more radical. The radicality of evil is not about how bad, how extreme the evil actions are, but it is about this being an evil, which is an evil at the root of the human being, not at the surface, not just doing evil because there's a lack of goodness, but rather, no, there is a bad principle. There is an evil root in that person that makes him do evil. If that, it doesn't matter if out of hatred you go amok and massacre a bunch of people, or out of an ill temper you just yell at someone. Those might be of different degrees of extremity, but they are equally radically evil, because in both cases you made the decision to listen to your sensual drives rather than the moral law, to give those drives power over yourself. And that decision itself cannot have been driven by your sensuality, because it was the decision to first give your sensuality power. And that is the radical evil, that we make this decision. I can once again employ Kant's analogy that I used in my previous lecture on the moral feeling of reverence, the analogy of the individual with the state, where Kant says that, like in the state, there is a legislative power. In the individual, there is reason through which we give ourselves the moral law. And Kant says, just like the legislative and the laws itself would not be enough in the state, like any citizen could just ignore the law and do whatever he wants, there needs to be an executive power enforcing and enacting the laws. So in the individual, there needs to be this moral feeling of reverence for the law that makes us act according to the law. And then I said judiciary is like the conscience, checking, judging if the law has been followed correctly. And the inclinations, the sensual drives, they would be like the ordinary citizens, which can follow their desires and try to reach happiness, try to reach satisfaction, but should only be allowed to do so within the framework of the law, without which there would be chaos, and that is the citizens or the individual inclinations, would fight each other. Well, I also said in that lecture on the feeling of reverence that in a proper republic, as a rational state, as Kant would want, you would have the rule of law. That is, the citizens would be subjected to a law that is rational, that reason itself gives, even if they might not like it, even if the majority might not like the law. Even that majority could not just change at least the basic constitutional laws. Even the majority would not be allowed to take someone's rights away, like to take the rights away of a minority. But on the other hand, I said in an ochlocracy, that is when you have mob rule, the government, like a populist government, demagogic politicians, they act as if they were just at the service of the mob. So whatever the mob desires, it gets, even if it is against the rational law. So even if it is against the human rights of certain people in the state. Well, this analogy might help here too. Because what would be evil in that case? Like, what would be an evil politician, an evil government? The politicians may decide to just listen to the mob. Now, how extreme the evil that they will do will now be may very much depend on the mob and what the mob wants. Like, this could lead to smaller evils, just some discriminatory laws, or it could be leading to bigger evils, to people actually getting killed, maybe even to atrocities being committed against some minority. But the actual radical evil here would be the decision of those politicians in the first place to even listen to the mob, to at all take the mob's unreflected desires as more important than the law and than the human rights. Whatever those desires may be, however far those populist politics may go, that's not what makes this evil radical, but rather the decision of a politician. I will not ever go against the mob. I will not ever go against the majority. I will not ever go against those who scream the loudest. I will not stand for what is right, even if it is a minority position. I will not stand for the rule of law, even if the majority feels the law is a yoke that they want to throw off. But rather, I will give the mob whatever it screams for. I will only look at the polls, and I will only try to be popular. And I will not even try to shape the opinion, right? Like, at least here in Germany, the constitution actually says the political party's job is to take part in the shaping of public opinion. The constitution does not say the parties should just be at the service of the public and just follow public opinion, which is what they do, right? Because not just the actual Nazi party, but more or less all of them are populist parties that just look at the polls, look what people want, and then they see, okay, people want to they want to get rid of refugees, they want to get rid of immigrants, they hate Mohammedans, so we have to make laws against immigration. We have to try to ban the hijab. Or they see, okay, people want to ruin the climate, people want to ruin the future of their children, which I mean is a fact, right? This should not be a controversial thing to say. This is what people want. People may put it into other words. They may say, no, what I want is keep flying in vacation, or what I want is a strong economy, or whatever. But part of Aufklärung is learning to consider the conscious intentions of people as just the superstructure and the rationalization and the self-deception, and is to start treating people as if that what they actually do, not what they claim to want to do, but what they actually do was actually what they wanted to do. What people actually do is ruining the future of their children, So it stands to reason that that is what they actually do want to do. It stands to reason that they actually actively hate their children. This is something that Wilhelm Reich has shown, has described as the emotional plague, an unconscious drive in people to hate life, to attack life, to want to destroy life as such. But anyways, that aside, the point is that our politicians don't follow the constitution, which says the parties should take part in shaping the public opinion. So the parties don't just have to accept, okay, this is people's opinion. They could try to change people's opinions. They could try to convince people. They could try to talk to people. They could try to reason with people. They could try to show people that, for example, the climate is an actual issue, or, for example, we have to help Ukraine because first it's just the just and right thing to do to help somebody who was attacked, but second, it's also the pragmatic thing to do because this fight of Ukraine is really a fight for all of the West and all of the West's freedom. But no, they don't do that. They don't try to take part in the shaping of people's public opinions. I mean, the only ones who do that really are the right wingers and mostly those who have been paid by Muscovy. But rather, they decided to just follow the public opinion and to just serve whatever is the mob's opinion. And that decision, that is the radical evil. Whatever comes from it, the actual evil policies and how extreme or not so extreme they may be, that is second. And this is also true if we go back from this analogy from the state to the individual. Whatever your inclinations, your desires may make you do in a certain circumstance, and however extreme or not so extreme that may be, that is secondary. But the actual radical evil is your decision to, in the first place, even follow those desires of yours rather than follow the moral law. So what Kant says is we cannot just say that we are tempted, sensually tempted, to go against the law, and evil is just falling to temptation. Kant says it doesn't even matter here whether you believe in some sort of inner temptation, that is through your own sensual desires, or if you believe in some sort of outer temptation, like in the devil who whispers into your ear, right? Like having this little devil on your shoulder who tells you to not listen to the little angel, to not do what is good, but to do what's evil. That is secondary. You can believe either, that you have the inner temptation of your desires or the outer temptation of the devil. But you cannot ever say that you, in the end, did evil because the temptation was just too strong, but rather, before that, you must have made the decision, even if it wasn't a conscious decision, that's not what Kant claims, but you must have made the decision to listen to the temptation, to your desires or to the devil, to even be tempted. And that is the radical evil. That unconscious decision of ours to even give power to the one who tempts us, which accidentally, Kant himself couldn't have been aware of that, but accidentally, this is what the Quran says, right? The Quran is very clear that the devil has no real power over us, and that therefore we cannot excuse ourselves saying, oh, the devil made me do it, it's Satan, it's his fault, not mine. But rather it says, and Satan will say when the matter has been concluded, indeed, Allah had promised you the promise of truth, And I promised you, but I betrayed you. But I had no authority over you except that I invited you, and you responded to me. So do not blame me, but blame yourselves. I cannot be called to your aid, nor can you be called to my aid. Indeed, I deny your association of me with Allah before. Indeed, of the wrongdoers is a painful punishment. So the radical evil, that is the deep-rooted evil, is this propensity every human being has to pick the sensual desires over the moral law. That doesn't mean that we necessarily are actually evil, but it means, once again, a propensity, a tendency to evil. It means that we are all capable of evil. Even the best person may not be doing evil, but is at least capable of it. Here it's important to know that it's important to understand Kant's terminology, because you need to know that Kant has three different types of desiring that he differentiates. As always, when it comes to that, Kant believes in the architectonic method, which I explained in its own lecture. So Kant believes we shouldn't just look around empirically at whatever we happen to find, saying, okay, I find this type of desiring and I find that type of desiring, because you would never know if you found everything there is to find or if you overlooked something. But rather in science, we should be architectonic. So we should first, a priori, before experience, have a basic principle by which we go, and which tells us which types or how many types there must be, which tells us what to look out for. And this architectonic principle of his is always the table of categories, which I also already explained in its own lecture. So to him, there's a number of categories that is of basic concepts, of pure rational concepts, of intellectual notions that we have that determine and rule all our thinking. And therefore, everything we can think must conform to these basic categories. And when it comes to our desires, Kant goes with the categories of modality, which are, of course, possibility and impossibility, existence and non-existence, and necessity or contingence, right? Everything that you could possibly think of must fall under one of these three categories. You must think of it as either not actually existing, but being possible at least, or being impossible, or you must think of it existing or not existing, or you must think of it as necessarily existing or existing but without being necessary. So this also goes for our desires, which means that first we can have a propensity for something, by which Kant means that we don't actually desire it, but it is a possible desire. It is a desire that we could have, that under certain circumstances maybe could awaken or could be formed. Like if someone has a propensity for alcohol, for drunkenness, that does not mean that he is actually an alcoholic. It does not mean that he actually even desires to drink alcohol. Maybe he never did. Maybe he doesn't even know what it's like to drink alcohol. But if he has this propensity, it means that if he ever tried drinking alcohol, he would probably like it and want to do it again. And he was maybe at danger, if he ever started drinking, to become an alcoholic. But he could go his whole life without ever desiring it. I mean, he could go his whole life without even realizing that there is such a thing as alcohol if he's like on a lone island or whatever. And second, there is what Kant calls appetite. That would correspond with the category of existence. So that would be a desire we actually have, not just a possible desire, but an actual desire. But it could be like a one-time thing, right? Like maybe at the store they offer a certain fruit that you have never tasted before, and so now you're like, okay, I have an appetite for that now. I would like to try it. I now desire this, but then you do try it, and either you don't like it at all, so you never want to eat it again, or maybe you even do like it somewhat, but it's not that special, so you could eat it again, but you don't necessarily need to. Um, so you won't go out of your way to eat it again. So the appetite, and by the way, appetite is not limited, of course, to food. Don't be fooled by the word here. The appetite is a desire that we have in a given moment, but we could maybe have it again, or maybe we could never have it again. And lastly, corresponding to the category of necessity, there is the inclination. Because inclination to Kant is a desire that we don't just happen to have, but it is a desire that has become necessary for us. So an appetite can turn into an inclination, and then it's a desire we, so to say, can't get rid of. We can't stop desiring that thing. Of course, that doesn't mean that we necessarily have to follow our desire, because we still remain free, autonomous beings. I can always reject that desire, but I will always have it, maybe. Like, I may have, being a sexual being, I may have an inclination towards women. That is, I will always desire women. When I see an attractive woman, I may always desire her. Doesn't mean I have to act on that desire. Maybe I can, if I'm strong enough, I can go, if I make that decision that I don't, for whatever reason, I don't want to have sex, I can maybe go my whole life without sex, but I still will have this inclination all my life. And the thing with inclinations is, Kant says that they are usually not natural. There might be some things that we are that our nature pushes us towards, but Kant would say that inclinations, they can come out of instinct. In most cases, they come out of habit. So by nature, we would have propensities, we would also have appetites, but it is usually habit. It is usually being used to an appetite and to satisfying that appetite many times, which turns it into an inclination. And people usually don't question that, right? Because questioning yourself, self-criticism, that is what drives Aufklärung. The unaufkläred people, they just accept things as they are. They accept their own desires as they are, and never question themselves. I talked in the lecture on what is freedom about what I call the liberal concept of freedom. And I said there that basically everyone today is a liberal in that sense, be they left wing, be they right wing. That this liberal concept of freedom is about just going with whatever you happen to desire and thinking you are free if you can get it, and you are unfree if you are prevented from fulfilling and satisfying your desire. But the liberals never want to question, where does this desire even come from? Should I even desire it? Is it a good thing? Is it rational to desire this? Or should I maybe try to go against this desire, or to stop myself from desiring this? Um, they don't ask themselves that. They are even offended when someone asks that question. They consider it a restriction of their freedom because, again, freedom to them means satisfying my desires, so I cannot possibly question them. So, really, freedom to them means what Kant calls the freedom of a turnspit. It is the freedom to be the slave of my own desires. And I mean, for example, take a question like eating meat or being vegetarian. Um, I have often heard people say, "Oh, I could not abstain from meat. I need to eat meat." Now, we could discuss whether you should abstain from meat, no matter for what reason, for the animal's sake, for the climate's sake, whether it would be rational to abstain. That's something we could have a discussion about. And maybe you have good arguments for saying that you shouldn't. It's not your moral duty to abstain from meat. Okay, fair enough. But that's not what you are saying. What you are saying is that you couldn't, that even if it was the rational thing to do, you could not bring yourself to do it. And for that reason, you refuse to even entertain the question whether it is rational to eat meat or not. You just say, no, rationality doesn't even factor in. This is my desire. I cannot get rid of that desire, so I want to keep eating meat. And I'm sorry, this is just pathetic. This means refusing to be a human being. This means being an animal. Because, sure, an animal has to follow its desires, its instincts. It cannot help itself. But as a human, you are more than that, or at least you're supposed to be more than that. You have reason. Just like we can ask you in an extreme situation, like if you are stranded with one other person on a boat in the ocean, you have a desire to eat. That desire drives you maybe to cannibalism, but like we could ask you in that extreme situation to use your reason to think, no, this would not be right, I shouldn't do this. Or just like if you had pedophile desires, we could ask yourself to use your reason to say, okay, but I mustn't act according to these desires, it would be wrong. Um, just like that, we should ask you to always, including, for example, when it comes to eating meat, to always question your desires and to always ask your reason, is this really the right thing to do, or should I reconsider this? And if you think about this, that's why I used this example. Okay, people may say, I could not abstain from eating meat, meaning it's my inclination, it's a necessary desire I have. But is this really even a natural inclination? Probably not, since there are vegetarians. So it seems that it is possible for human beings to go without eating meat. Um, and then you may say, I couldn't go without eating meat. But are you really eating meat? Like, are you eating any random animal? No, you're probably eating just a very small handful of animals. You're probably eating pork and beef and cotton. You're maybe eating chickens. Um, but there are so many animals that you don't eat. Like, there are tons of bugs that you probably don't eat. That you probably would feel disgusted by if you had to eat them. But why is that the case? Because there are people who eat them, right? Like in Vietnam, uh, they have this big maggots that are eaten alive while they are still wiggling around. Many people here in the West would probably find that disgusting, but clearly that is just because they have not been raised eating those live maggots. They have been raised on pork or beef, so they don't find that disgusting. Well, other people find that disgusting. For example, I know many Mohammedans who say, to me, pork is disgusting. So it's not just because it's a commandment that I mustn't eat it that I abstain from pork. Rather, even if Allah Himself spoke to me out of the clouds and said, okay, from now on, I'm lifting that commandment, from now on you're allowed to eat pork, I would still not eat pork because I just find it disgusting. But why do they find it disgusting? Clearly, just because they have been raised without eating it, rather they have been raised while being told you mustn't eat this, it is bad to eat this is unclean meat. While maybe a non-Mohammedan German or whatever, let's say American or French or whatever, a kid that has been raised on pork will not find it disgusting. So really, when you say I could not abstain from eating meat, you are abstaining from thousands of meats, thousands of types of animals that you don't eat. And these few types that you do eat, you are probably just used to that because you were raised with that. So it is an inclination that is not necessarily natural, but rather that has been formed through habit. And this is something we should not let happen, Kant says. This is really pathetic. This takes away from our own dignity as human beings because it takes away our freedom. Because, as I discussed in the lecture on freedom, to Kant, freedom is not this liberal freedom, this following my desires, but rather to him, freedom is being rational, being able to think about what we should desire, what would be the best thing to do, and then to act not according to sensual drives, but according to our own insight into good and evil, act according to our own concepts. So Kant would say that we should take care not to form habits and not to turn our appetites unnecessarily into inclinations. That is, not make desires that we do have, that are maybe okay to have, uh, but to not let them turn into desires that we must have, that are necessary for us and that we cannot get rid of anymore and that therefore enslave us. But back to the radical evil. So, what Kant is saying here is not that people may have an appetite for evil, and certainly not that people have an inclination for evil. That is, that people always necessarily desire what is evil. But what he is saying is that every human being, even the best, most moral person there is, has at least a propensity for evil. That is, there's at least a possibility of evil. And that is the radical evil. That means that there is something deep rooted in our nature which is evil. This fact that we are capable of evil at all, even when we are good people, we still remain capable of it. That is our radical evil. So, as a sort of conclusion of what was said so far, Kant says when we want to explain evil, out of these two possibilities I presented, the human being is really a human being. He is neither a devil nor is he an animal. That means that a malicious and evil reason, an evil will, is too much as an explanation for evil and is something that is not possible. But mere sensuality, sensual desires that are stronger, allegedly, than our reason, is too little to explain evil. Because how can they even be stronger? Rather, what Kant says is that the inborn, the deep-rooted and therefore radical evil that all human beings have is this propensity to follow sensuality rather than reason. And that propensity itself cannot be sensual because it comes before that, right? It's about making the decision to rather give in to sensuality, to rather give it power over you. And if you really reflect on yourself, on times when maybe you have done something bad, or even you don't even have to think of the morally bad, but just when you have gone against your own intentions, then you will probably notice that if you are honest with yourself, it wasn't that your desires were stronger. You will probably have to admit to yourself that if you really wanted to, you could have resisted your desires. Like that time when you cheated on your wife, no matter how hot that other woman was. If you're really honest with yourself, you could have abstained. Or that time when once again you told yourself you would stop smoking and then you smoked again. If you're honest, you could have really stopped smoking. But if you're really honest with yourself, you will realize that you just didn't want to. You made the, albeit unconscious, decision to give in to your desires, to be weak, to not fight against them harder. You probably made up excuses saying to yourself, oh, I'm just cheating this one time, and my wife will never find out, so it won't hurt her, or it's really her fault because she doesn't want to have sex with me anymore. I need to satisfy myself somehow. Or you told yourself, oh yeah, I will stop smoking next week, just one more time, makes no difference. Or okay, today was so stressful, I need a cigarette now, it's just an exception, and then tomorrow I will really stop. Or where someone offered me to smoke with him now, that's different. On my own, I would not have done it, but I'm just doing it to be polite now. And if you are really honest with yourself, then you can maybe notice that even the very moment you form good intentions, you often already made this decision to not really take them seriously, to not really have a firm character, but rather to eventually give in, and to you basically, in the moment you made these intentions up, you already prepared the excuses that you would lead later. And it is this willingness to excuse yourself, this willingness to give in to sensuality when you didn't have to, which is the actual radical evil. It's not that sensuality is just so strong that it pulls you, rather that convincing yourself of that, telling yourself, oh, it wasn't my fault, my sensual desires were just too strong, that is itself part of this radical evil. That is itself part of excusing yourself through lies you tell yourself. No, you could have acted differently. You decided against it, and that propensity to again and again decide against it, that is what Kant calls the radical evil that is deep rooted in human nature. Radical evil is not about losing in the fight against your sensual desires. It is about secretly wanting to lose, secretly not really wanting to resist more. And this leads to an old question in philosophy, and that is the question whether humans are good or evil by nature. And the first position is one that was, for example, advocated by Rousseau, who is a thinker that had a big influence on Kant, that Kant appreciated a lot, that Kant considered one of the greatest geniuses of his time. And Rousseau says that by nature human beings are good, and it is basically just society which makes us bad. Society raises us wrong, gives us all sorts of unnatural desires for luxury goods, for status, pits us against one another, makes all sorts of creates all sorts of competitions with other people that would not exist in a natural state. And so really what we need is to go back to the natural state somehow, to take away the bad influences of society, that sort of perverted and distorted the true good human nature. And this position of Rousseau's has more or less been the leftist position to this day, right? Leftist opinions and ideologies, they are always about more or less saying at the root humans are good. It's just that they are in the wrong society, like the socialists in the 90s and early 20th century. They would say, well, maybe many of the workers beat their wives and children, or they steal, or they are drunkards, but that is really just because of the terrible conditions under which they live. This is really just how they are raised without any education, how they have no economic perspective. And if we create a classless society without exploitation, if we get rid of capitalism, then these crimes will vanish. They are unnatural, really. Or leftists nowadays may say that even if crime statistics say that immigrants, that refugees, that black people, that Mohammedans, whatever, are more likely to commit certain crimes, that they may be more likely to rape or to murder or to steal or whatever, it's really not for genetical reasons. It's not something that you should explain in a racist manner, saying, oh, they are just more inclined to crime by their nature, but rather it is because of their socio-economic conditions. It's because they have no perspective in this society. It's because they are poor. It's because they are not given proper education. And if we just created a more equal, a less racist society, then this would change, right? Or if we just got rid of patriarchy and how it distorts sexuality, how it commodifies sexuality and women's bodies, and how it leads to objectification, then a lot of sexual deviance and sexual crimes such as rapes would just vanish. So that has always been more or less a leftist position. And then on the other side, you have someone like Hobbes, who has a more cynical view of human nature and says the human is the other human's wolf. Says that in the natural state, humans would not be good, but rather completely selfish, and there would be a war of all against all. And we basically need society that is to some degree authoritarian or restrictive. We would need restrictive laws and maybe also restrictive social norms to rein in this selfish and evil, violent human nature. And that has always been more or less the position of the right, to say the fact that humans are bad, the fact that crimes happen, that is not due to bad social conditions that we could change, but rather that is nature. And so all we can do, all society, all the government can do is sort of deal with that nature, sort of put these wild animals that humans are into change. We need restrictive, for example, sexual norms, right? We need, for example, we can't have sex at least not too early, because if we do that, if we tell children just the truth, then they will all become gay or whatever. And we need restrictive laws, we need law and order to prevent crime. There is no other way. And that those are the two usual positions, of course simplified. And I must say that a general issue when it comes to philosophy and people dealing with philosophy, and a lot of popular explanations of what certain philosophers allegedly said, a basic issue is superficiality. A basic issue, and that's not just here when it comes to Kant and what he says on whether humans are good or evil by nature. That's also when it comes to other questions, like take a question like free will, and what does, for example, Nietzsche say about free will, or what does Nietzsche say about morality, or what does a philosopher say about God? Usually, the philosopher's on a whole other level than the regular debate is. Usually, both positions in the regular debate are quite superficial and quite wrong. And if you are too superficial in reading a philosopher, if you make it too easy for yourself, if you just say, oh, in this debate he's on this side and therefore he's against the other side, you will completely misunderstand him, right? Like when people say, oh, Nietzsche is against morality. Okay, yes, I mean, technically you can say that. Technically it's right, I guess. But if you read that as, oh, therefore Nietzsche is for selfishness, therefore Nietzsche is for you just following your base desires and just doing whatever you like to satisfy your desires, even if it harms others. No, Nietzsche would say that's pathetic. Can't you do anything more with your life? So really, if you truly want to understand a philosopher, you need to be careful and you must go deeper. And that is true here too. Because Kant, despite his appreciation for Rousseau, he disagrees with Rousseau here. He says, no, it's not that humans are just good by nature and that they just get perverted by society and we just need to take away the bad influences to sort of get to the good core of humans. In a way, he does say that humans are evil by nature, but by that he doesn't necessarily mean, as Hobbes or many right-wingers might say, that humans have evil desires or even evil inclinations by nature. They just have a propensity for evil. That is, they are capable of evil. They are always in danger of doing evil. But despite that evil nature, Kant does not say that they just have to stay the way they are. That's a typical mark of unaufklärdness. Unaufklärdness always thinks of being and never of becoming. So for unaufklärdness, the status quo is just set in stone. It cannot be changed. While for Aufklärung, there is such a thing as change and development and progress. So Kant would say that by nature, humans are evil, and again, not necessarily actively evil, but they have this propensity for evil. And therefore, we mustn't just let them or set them back into their natural state. Here he goes with Hume against Rousseau. Hume, who says that no, goodness is not just there. We don't just need to prevent bad influences like on the child, but rather goodness must be cultivated. But Kant also believes it can be cultivated. It's not that because we are evil by nature, we have to always stay evil and can never become better. No, we can become good, but it needs work. So in that sense, Kant says, by nature, there is a deep-rooted radical evil in humans. There is this propensity for evil, but even though they are not actually positively good by nature, humans at least have a disposition for goodness by nature. That is, there is the possibility that they become good. But he can only become good, not wholly like God, which means that he will never get rid of his propensity for evil, meaning at every point, even the best human being still has to always decide whether to follow this natural propensity for evil or follow his natural disposition for good. And Kant talks more specifically about what he calls the evilness of the heart. That is this propensity for evil. Um, I will point out that heart here means something else than when Kant talks of the evil heart as part of sensuality. I gave a lecture on why compassion and a good heart don't make a good person. And there, the heart by Kant refers to us either having sympathy for others and therefore having compassion, feeling their suffering, feeling their joy, or having no sympathy, uh, being cruel, being cold hearted and cruel against others. Um, this is not what is meant here. Rather, when Kant speaks of the heart in relation to evil as such and in relation to the radical evil, um, heart is more like the ability or the disposition to take up a moral maxim. Just like a head, so having a good head, Kant would say, would be the disposition for your intellect, for having a good intellect, for having right concepts. So um, the heart would be the disposition for taking up good moral maxims. And in that way, there are three ways in which you can have an evil heart, Kant would say. And these three types of the radical evil correspond with the three human natures. Because to Kant, the human being, I will go into more detail about that when I address Kant's anthropology eventually, but for now, to be brief, the human being is a essential being, an animal basically. B, it is an intellectual sensual being, a thinking animal. And C, it is a spiritual being, a rational being. And therefore, there can be three types of this radical evil. The first type of these three evils, so the one corresponding with our merely sensual, our animal nature, Kant calls the fragility or the frailty of the heart. And it basically means being weak, um, giving in to your sensual desires and following them rather than following the moral law. And he who is evil in this first sense may even be conscious of it and may even um, have the intention of following the moral law, may even feel bad about doing evil, but he will just say that he's too weak. So, for example, the ill-tempered person who gets angry and yells at someone or even attacks someone, beats someone, may later be shocked at himself for having lost his temper like that. Or the lustful person who keeps cheating on his wife may feel bad about it and say, oh, I shouldn't do this, I should stop this. But they will just say, I'm too weak, my drives are stronger. So, this first type of evil most strongly corresponds to this common opinion that the evil is just the weakness of the flesh, that the evil is just caused by our sensuality being stronger and getting the better of us. But it is important to note that, once again, this is not Kant's opinion, but rather he says the radical evil here is the willingness to be weak, the willingness to give in to your sensual drives. It's not that they do necessarily control you, but that you let them control you. The second evil, the one that corresponds with us as being both sensual and intellectual, as thinking animals, so to say, is what Kant calls the impurity of the heart. And this evil is our tendency to uh, maybe even do the right thing. So, not like the evil of the first type, where we do the wrong thing because we follow our sensual drives. Here, we maybe do the right thing, but we do it for the wrong reasons. We do it out of some sensual drive. So maybe I'm outwardly a very good person. I always help others. I'm always nice to others. But I do it out of my sensuality. Maybe I'm just such a compassionate person. I can't see others suffering, so I help. I donate money when I see suffering. And maybe I'm just by nature such a friendly person. I have such a good temper. I never get angry, so I'm always nice to everyone. But I don't do it really out of moral conviction. I don't do it out of reverence for the moral law as such. I do it because my sensuality inclines me to do it, but I'm satisfied with that. So Kant would say in this case, and I discussed that already in the lecture on the good will and the good deeds, my actions have legality, they are in accordance with the moral law, but they lack true morality of the will. Or he would also say that objectively I am moral, I'm doing what morality dictates, but subjectively, so when we really look at me as a subject, how I am, what my inner will is, subjectively, I'm not good. This would mean maybe having good morals, but without being morally good, Kant says. And this is very common. This is maybe the vast majority of seemingly good people. And it is dangerous. This is why self reflection, self criticism is so important for Aufklärung. If you are just content with doing good deeds and therefore being able to tell yourself that everything's all right, you're a good guy, um, without really questioning yourself critically why you are doing those good deeds and whether you are really doing them out of reverence for the moral law, whether you really helped your friend right now because it was the right thing to do or just because he was your friend and you liked him, and whether you would really have done the same for a stranger that you don't happen to like. uh, that is very dangerous. I know people who seem to be the best, the most saintly people, even who seem to be very good, usually, and they do it out of their sensual nature, out of having compassionate drives and so on, and never question themselves and are content and even self-righteous about this, about being oh so good, and then something happens that makes them act in a different manner. Like they are just good out of their sensuality, out of their compassion. So if their sensuality is affected differently, if you annoy them, for example, uh, then they can act in a really nasty and toxic manner, uh, and are not able to realize it, to question themselves, because once again, they don't ask if they really are acting out of reverence for the moral law. But most important is the third kind of the radical evil. So the one that corresponds with our super sensual, with our spiritual nature. This one Kant calls the perversity of the heart, or also the malice or the rottenness of the heart. And it is the propensity to take up maxims that are not morally good and to follow those not good maxims and to tell yourself that this is all right, to deceive yourself. And this is the true radical evil, right? The first two types of evil, I mean, fair enough. Uh, they can, of course, lead to bad actions, maybe even to very bad actions, maybe even to murder in some cases. Um, and the thing about them, however, is that you can do them, so to say, unintentionally, right? You can be weak and follow your sensuality instead of the moral law, or you can do what the moral law dictates without really realizing or without really asking yourself if you are really doing it because the moral law dictates it or just because you happen to also like doing this. Um, but this can happen unintentionally. But giving yourself a non moral maxim is something you do with intention, which does not mean the same as doing it consciously. It can happen very unconsciously, but still, it's a decision you make. And the evil of the first two kinds, you can become conscious of that and you can want to change, right? You can afterwards feel bad about it and regret the fact that you acted, that you did something bad out of some sensual desire, or that you did the right thing but not for the right reasons, just out once again of a sensual desire. Um, for that, you can feel bad and you can decide that you want to change, that you want to do better next time. But if you already decided to follow a non moral maxim, and if you tell yourself into, if you deceive yourself into believing that this is okay, that this is morally all right, um, unless you stop deceiving yourself, unless you start being more honest with yourself, then there's nothing that can be really done about it. Then there's no way you can ever really become better. And that we are capable of this, Kant says, shows a deep rooted perfidy and um, a radical rottenness of the human heart. And even if it's not actively evil, it at least means complete unworthiness. It is this ability of ours to choose a maxim that is not morally good and to lie to ourselves about it, to um, betray ourselves. And this is the proper radical evil. This is basically what arises from the other two forms of evil. And this is basically what, because, right, the first form is that you are willing to follow a sensual drive instead of the moral law. The second form is that you are willing to be satisfied with having done what the law asks for, um, even if it is out of a sensual drive and not because the law asked for it. Well, the third is exactly that you lie to yourself about this. That you tell yourself, oh no, I'm not following my sensual drives. I'm not having other, let's say, selfish maxims, but rather I'm doing what I should be doing. I'm perfectly all right. And this is the one evil that can also not be excused, right? The first two, they have to do with our sensual nature. Again, they correspond either our nature as animals or our nature as thinking animals, but still on some level animals. Um, they are only possible because we have sensual drives that, in the first case, may drive me to evil actions, or in the second case, may drive me even to good actions, but still they are just actions I was driven to, not actions I did out of reverence for the moral law. But this third type of evil this corresponds with my super sensual spiritual nature. There is no drive here. Nothing drives me to take up non-moral maxim. Nothing drives me to lie to myself, and still I do it. And often when Kant is discussed, I mean, when his theory of evil and the radical evil is discussed at all, um, which doesn't happen always, but even when it does happen, um, not enough emphasis is put on this third type of evil. Kant himself, when he writes about the radical evil, he does so, as I already mentioned in his book, The Religion in the Bounds of Mere Reason. There it is easy to think that, okay, there are these three types of evil and they are basically equal. But if you have a look at his notes, at the way he reflects about radical evil, there he is much more direct about the fact that the true radical evil is deceitfulness, is the human ability and propensity to do so, to lie to ourselves. This is also why truthfulness is so important to Kant. Like, again, people here are terribly superficial. They hear that, okay, Kant says lying is evil and you mustn't lie, it's immoral, and they hear that in some essay Kant said you mustn't lie even if it is to save someone else's life, and then people just automatically reject that, say, oh, that's too radical, that's too rigorous, that's not a good moral principle, and they never go deeper. They never ask why was it so important to Kant. And I will address that in a future lecture where I will talk about truthfulness. But here you have basically an important root of this. To Kant, lying is not just one evil action amongst others, like, okay, murder is bad, rape is bad, stealing is bad, lying is bad. And then, of course, you could easily say, okay, but maybe out of those, lying is the least bad. Isn't it much less harmful than, say, murdering someone? But no, Kant would say it's not just one offense amongst others, and probably not even the most terrible one, but rather it is the most terrible offense and breach of the moral law there is, because all others are based on it. But what is important to understand and what most don't realize is that to Kant, what matters most is not so much whether you lie to others. Sure, you shouldn't do that. But most of all, you should not lie to yourself, right? As Hannah Arendt nicely put it, he who betrays others but knows that he is a liar is at least an honest liar. And with him, truth as such doesn't yet die. He's just not telling the truth to others, he's just betraying others. But at least in himself, truth lives on. He is aware of what is actually the case, even if he pretends that something else is the case. But there's no worse liar than he who doesn't know that he's a liar, than he who deceives himself first. And Kant would say, sure, you mustn't lie to others. And he would say, if you don't hate the lie as such, if you don't have the deepest love and reverence for truth, if you are capable of lying to others and think of it as a small, excusable matter, or even maybe in some cases as a morally good thing, then certainly you will also deceive yourself. You will also be capable of lying to yourself. So, not lying to others is really a must if you want to be truthful with yourself, you would say. But still, what really matters is not so much lying to others. What really matters is not lying to yourself. And this is not just one offense amongst others, this is the moral offense, because all other moral offenses are based on it. We can only be immoral because, once again, we don't have a truly evil will. We don't have a devilish will. We don't say, I want to do evil for evil's sake. And so we can only do evil when we trick ourselves into believing that what we are doing isn't evil. Think about it. Take any possible villain, any possible person doing evil. In their mind, they are probably not evil. No matter how extreme the evil they commit is, um, first, at the root of it, there must be the radical evil of self deception, of telling themselves what I'm doing here is okay. Like I discussed some of these lies in the previous lecture on why morality is not about the consequences of our actions, right? There I mentioned that people always use consequentialism to excuse themselves, that they say, oh, my actions, if I stop them, these evil actions, there would be no good consequences because others will keep doing it, right? If I stop flying or eating meat, ruining the climate, others will keep destroying the climate. If I stop consuming so much, taking part in exploitation, exploitation will still go on. If I stop watching child porn, others will still watch and produce child porn. So I might as well keep doing it, right? If I stop killing the Jews, then my comrades, the other soldiers, will kill the Jews anyway. So I might as well keep doing it. And I also mentioned there that Arendt points out how the biggest crimes in history and in the 20th century have all been done in the name of necessity. People don't go and kill millions of people, commit a genocide by saying, oh, we just want to do this. We just choose to be evil. No, they always play victim. Unfortunately, there's very, very little awareness in the world of what genocide is and how genocide works. We can very clearly see that in the arguments for why Israel is not committing genocide. Because if people knew better, they would say that they would know that the genocider in his own mind is always the victim. It is always self-defense. Nobody, even if there is hatred, even if there is racism as such is not enough for genocide, right? There was certainly racism in the US in the time of the Civil War before slavery was ended, but that didn't lead to outright genocide. No, people must first feel as victims. They must think that if we don't get rid of those people, they will get rid of us. Right? That's what the Nazis said. They said that the Jews were responsible for Germany losing the First World War. The Jews had stabbed the dagger into the back of the German army, and the Jews were responsible for the hunger at the end of the First World War, for people starving, and for the economic breakdown. And so, if the Germans didn't want to lose the Second World War, they had to get rid of the Jews. And they had to get rid of all of them, as Himmler said, because otherwise, if we just kill the man, we allow the children to grow up and to take eventually revenge on our children. So, in order for our children to be safe, we must get rid of the Jews altogether. And this is the normal reasoning of genocide. If anything is abnormal here in that example, it's that the Germans weren't victims at all, that this was completely made up, that the Jews were indeed innocent. But you mustn't be fooled. In most cases, there is at least some justification to it. In most cases, the genociders say, oh, we must protect ourselves, we have been attacked. And it's not entirely wrong. They have really been attacked. Like in the genocide in Rwanda, there was the fear that if we don't genocide the Tutsis, they will genocide us. And the Tutsis had indeed committed atrocities. Or likewise in the genocide in Bosnia, when the Serbs genocided Bosnians, they believed that they had to do this, or else the Bosnians would genocide them. And indeed, sometime before that, some half a century earlier in the Second World War, that had happened. The Bosnians back then had sided with the Nazis and had been so cruel, had committed such atrocities that even the Nazis had been shocked. and they had committed genocide against the Serbs back then. So it was not entirely unjustified, and that is important to keep in mind when today we hear people say, "Oh, but Hamas started it." I mean, of course, things didn't start on the 7th of October, anyways. That's another matter. But even if it did, that of course wouldn't be a justification for genocide. But it is the usual justification for genocide. If we don't do it to them, they will do it to us. And that is, of course, a lie that people tell themselves. And that is precisely the point. If they didn't lie to themselves, or if they weren't capable of lying to themselves, they would not be capable of any other evil, right? If we couldn't tell ourselves, I mean, let's stay with Israel. There are so many lies. Anything that's said there as justification is a lie, right? That Israelis or that their allies and apologists believe. Israel is just defending itself. Well, Israel probably wouldn't have to defend itself if it didn't oppress the Palestinians for basically a whole human lifetime. Or they will say that this is just about the hostages. Hamas took hostages. Well, first off, Israel took way more hostages. Because so many Palestinians, I mean, of course, they don't get called hostages. That is another lie. They get called prisoners. But as Israeli journalist Gideon Levy has pointed out, we should call them hostages. That's what many of them are. They are not all terrorists, but many of them just get abducted, and many of them are children. Israel is the only country to systematically convict children in military courts. And second, if it was about the hostages, I mean, there have been 2 ceasefires with big hostage deals that show that this is really the best way to get the hostages out, right? While through the war, Israel has killed more hostages than it freed, and still hasn't managed, in almost 2 years, hasn't managed to free all the hostages. So, and it goes on and goes on, right? Bombing all the hospitals in Gaza. Oh, it's because they are Hamas headquarters. They are not. It's another lie. Or saying in general that Hamas is using the people as human shields. Again, a lie. There has been no documented case. I mean, it also wouldn't be that good of a tactic for Hamas, because Hamas is sort of dependent on the people's support, so they would probably lose the support if they use the people as human shields. Rather, every accusation is a confession, right? There have been many documented cases that Israel is using human shields. Israel is forcing Palestinians to go ahead into buildings or into tunnels where there might be traps or where there might be Hamas fighters to save its own soldiers. Or recently saying that, oh, we must starve the people because all the food we could give them would just be stolen by Hamas, for which, again, there has been no documented cases. Independent observers, independent NGOs say, no, Hamas is not taking all the food. So it's just lies up and lies up and lies. But imagine those lies weren't there. Imagine we would just honestly say, oh yeah, sure, we are committing a genocide. We are racist and we are committing a genocide and we are killing tens of thousands of children. You cannot say that to yourself. It's not just about what you can say to others, what you can get away with. You cannot get away with that in front of your own conscience. And this also is, of course, not true when it comes to big atrocities. Again, saying it with Arendt, the biggest crimes in history have been done in the name of necessity, have been done by people who said, oh, we are not responsible for this, we have to do this, there is no other way. But even small crimes, even the hotel guest who steals a towel probably cannot just tell himself, oh, I'm a thief. I am a thief, I have no honor, I'm pathetic, I steal towels. But he will tell himself, oh, it's just a small towel, it's not really a big loss for the hotel, they have enough money, they will hardly even feel it, or everybody does it, and they know that it happens anyways. They probably calculated in the price of the room, they probably expect you to steal it, so in a sense, I already paid for this towel. You have to tell yourself some sort of lie to justify your evil deeds, big or small. And even the few people who will not claim to be good and will not claim that the evil they do is good, who will probably say that there just isn't good or evil, there is no moral law, everyone is just selfish, so I might as well just look out for myself. Even those people, and I mean, that's already a small minority, right? Who really outright say, yeah, I don't try to be good. I'm just an egoist. I'm just in it for myself. Um, it would seem that they at least don't lie to themselves, that they at least manage to be evil without lies. But they too lie to themselves, because while they don't tell themselves that they are good, um, at least they tell themselves that they aren't evil, because they claim, everyone is like me. The seemingly good people are just hypocrites, they just pretend or they just lie to themselves, but really, no one is better than me, justifying themselves. And B, they tell themselves there is no moral law, so there is no good and evil. So while what I'm doing is not morally good, it's not morally allowed, it's also not forbidden, it's also not evil. But outright saying, yes, I'm an egoist and that is wrong, but I still am an egoist. Yes, what I do, there is a moral law, and what I do goes against the moral law, and still I do it. They don't have the strength to do that. No, we always need to somehow lie to ourselves. We always need to say, what I do isn't really evil. Everyone does it, therefore it's okay. Or the person who gets harmed, he started it, he attacked me first, so therefore it's deserved that he gets harmed. Or I have always, life hasn't given me anything, life has been unjust to me, I have always gotten the short end of the stick, so therefore I'm justified now. It's really life's fault, it's the society's fault, it's the other people's fault for not giving me what I deserve. I'm just taking what I deserve for myself now, and if it harms others, well, I was harmed so many times, so now others can get harmed for once. Some lie you always must tell yourself. And that is why this is the true radical evil. This um, ability of humans to lie to themselves. Um, if we didn't have that, or if we had true love for truth and truthfulness, then we could not bring ourselves to do other evil. So, in that sense, going back to the original question, um, what is evil in human beings? Is there a positive evil principle, like an evil will that fights against the good principle? Or is evil just a lack of goodness? Is it just weakness of our goodwill that cannot overcome our sensual drives? Well, Kant says, as I already said, there must be a positive principle resisting the positive good principle. The goodwill would easily overcome all obstacles if there was no positive obstacle at all. But there is not a positive evil principle that stands against the good principle. That would be too much. That would make us devils, and that's not possible. Rather, what opposes the positive good principle is not a positive evil principle, but it is a positive false or deceitful principle. it is the principle of deceiving ourselves. It is the deep-rooted, the radical human propensity to be content with not being good, to this willingness and readiness to tell ourselves that we already are good, or that we are good enough, at least, that we already conform with the moral law, we don't break the moral law, or even there is no moral law, um, to justify that we don't follow the moral law, but rather our senses. And this propensity to lie to ourselves, once again, comes before the pull of sensuality, because it is what first allows us to give in to that pull of sensuality. And I will add to that this, therefore, this third kind of evil is the one that should be truly despised. Like the first two kinds of evil, I can accept those. I mean, not accept in the sense of just letting them be. Of course, I would still say to someone, do better. But I will not completely throw someone away for either having been weak and having given in to his sensual drives and having done something evil, even if it's a big evil. Like, I could even accept a former murderer or rapist if he truly regretted what he did and truly tried to be better from now on. Like, I don't, that's exactly why I reject capital punishment. I don't believe in just throwing someone away completely, saying you have done too much evil, you have lost your right to live, you have lost your humanity. No, having humanity, as Kant would say, means having autonomy, means being free, means we always can still change, means no matter how evil we were in the past, we can decide to from now on be better. So even the murderer or rapist, I could accept, I could forgive if he just changed his ways. And I mean, this weakness, I think we really should, at least in most cases, we really should go more easy on that, because let's be honest with ourselves again, let's not deceive ourselves. We can all be weak. Who of us can really say that he has never been weak, that he has never followed his sensuality, his sensual drives rather than the moral law, and that he has never done evil because of that, never harmed anyone because of that? Usually, from my experience, precisely those who judge this the harshest, who are the most ready to just cancel someone forever because of something he has done like that, they are not the best, they are not the most saintly people. Usually, they are the ones who are very much inclined to themselves be weak, to themselves follow their sensual drives, but they also lie to themselves very much and hide it from themselves. And that's precisely why, to convince themselves that they are so much better, so much more pure, they have to attack others so much. And likewise, the evil of the second kind. I mean, if someone does good deeds, maybe not out of full reverence for the moral law, maybe out of sensual drives like love, like compassion, like a sense of honor, at least the world somewhat benefits from that. And at least he has some interest in what is good, even if it's not a truly moral interest for now, but just a pathological interest. Sure, he should have a truly good will. And sure, what he is right now is dangerous to some degree, because his senses that are affected in a manner right now that makes him help others could always be affected in a manner that makes him harm others. And because if he tricks himself into believing that his good deeds are enough, no matter where they come from, that could really harm his true moral progress, sure. But at least he's doing some good in the world. And at least he's not totally lost. So, and once again, we should go easy on that, because who of us is really better? Who of us can really honestly say that we always do good out of pure reverence for the moral law? Not because we are pulled towards it by some love or some compassion or whatever, or by wanting to feel better about ourselves. Who can really say that he treats all people equally, and that he doesn't treat those he likes, that he has sympathy for, better than others? So we should go easy on that. Which means also that when it comes to the evils of those first two kinds, I can to some degree excuse them in others. I can also be friends with people who commit evil of these first two kinds. Like, I don't have to be friends with only saints, with only perfect people. I can recognize that my friends may be imperfect, may be doing some things wrong. As long as it's of those first two kinds, it's okay. Again, not okay in the sense that I just accept it. I may still say, hey, this was wrong what you did there, try to do better. But I will not throw that person away. I will not cancel that person for it. But this third kind of evil, this self-deception, this is something I utterly despise. Because this is the true radical evil. You can do the worst things. You can be a murderer. If you realize that it's bad, and if you say, I try to be better, that's one thing. But on the other hand, you can be someone who does less bad things, who only does very small offenses. Maybe you're unfriendly sometimes, maybe you're a bit inconsiderate sometimes. But if you tell yourself, I'm perfect the way I am, what I did there was completely justified, and there's nothing I have to change, there's no way I have to try and be better, then you are rotten to your core, and there's no way to reach you, there's no way to touch you, there's no way to make you see, and there's no way you can become better. Unless, of course, you start loving truth, you stop deceiving yourself. But as long as you deceive yourself, this is like blocking yourself, putting a barrier over your own moral progress. And I can accept everything amongst my friends, all sorts of, let's say, evil deeds. But what I cannot accept is wrong moral judgments, is someone saying that something evil is in fact good, or that something good is in fact evil. Those are people that I don't want to associate with. And I will tell you, if you don't feel similar, if you don't hate this falseness, this perfidy, this self deception, if you don't despise it in others, if you don't lose all respect for someone who does it, if you don't want people who are very much capable of this out of your life, then I guarantee you that you are doing it yourself also. I guarantee that you yourself have no love for truth. And if you tell yourself otherwise, if you tell yourself, oh, it's not so bad, I guarantee that is part of your self-deception in that case. So much anyways for what Kant says about evil. But before I conclude this whole lecture, I still have to talk about why this matters. Kant says, since there is this radical evil, goodness in the human being can only exist in the form of virtue. Because virtue, he calls it at some point the bastard that comes from our disposition for goodness in combination with our propensity for evil, or in combination with our animal nature. Virtue to Kant means some sort of power, some sort of force. Virtue means being able to fight, being able to force yourself. When Kant usually is discussed, Kant's moral philosophy, there's a lot of talk of the importance of autonomy. And I myself talked about that in the lecture on what is freedom. Kant says our reason, our practical reason, that is our will, has autonomy, which means it can give itself a law, right? Auto means self, and nomos means the law. So we don't just have heteronomy, that is, we are not just ruled by the law of nature, by our senses, but rather we have autonomy. We can give ourselves a law. If we only had reason, once again, God is a pure rational being, that would be enough. God needs only autonomy because the law he gives himself is the only law there is for him. There is no law of nature for him. There is no sensuality, no sensual drives that pull him in another direction. So he has no reason to ever act against the law that his own will gives for himself. So he must be good. But since for us there are both laws, the law that our own reason gives and the law that nature gives for us, autonomy is not enough. We also, Kant says, and this is usually not discussed so much, we also need autocracy. And if autonomy is self-law giving, then autocracy is self-ruling or self-governing, right? So it's not enough that our reason gives a law to ourselves. We also need to force ourselves, to force our animal nature, so to say, to subject ourselves to that law. And the strength in doing so, that is what is virtue to Kant, which is precisely why only a being such as we needs virtue. Kant says that God can be called good, but not virtuous. To call him virtuous would actually be it would make God smaller. It would imply that God has something that pulls him away from goodness and that he needs to force himself to be good. This strength in forcing yourself, that is virtue. And that is even in the word itself, right? No matter the language, even. Like the German word for virtue is Tugend. And Tugend is related to the German word tüchtig. And the adjective tüchtig means to be competent, to be industrious, to be useful, to be hardworking. So to have Tugend, to have virtue, really means to be someone who's good for something, right? Who is hardworking, who is useful, who can do something. And if you go with the English word virtue, it, of course, like so many English words, comes ultimately from Latin, where virtus, first of all, it's interesting, it has a double meaning, because it can mean virtue in general, like any sort of virtue, like being just, for example, or being truthful, or being generous. But also it can specifically mean the virtue of courage, because there is no proper specific word for courage really in Latin. And one way to say courage is with this word virtus. So courage is not just a virtue, it is the virtue. And this makes sense if you think of courage as a sort of inner strength, right? If you think that he who has courage can go into any fight, will not shy away from anything, and he who has courage can do any other virtue. But also, if you ask where the word comes from, virtus comes from vir, and vir means man. So is cognate, by the way, with the word wer in werewolf, for example, because that was also an old Germanic word for man. So the werewolf is the man wolf. So virtues, virtue is really manliness. And now that may not be so politically correct nowadays, and it's not really the point that Kant is making. Like, he's not saying that women cannot be virtuous, but you can see what the thought behind the origin of that word was. That virtue is something that is about strength. That virtue is something warrior-like. That if you have virtue, you have a certain power, a certain forcefulness, and you can, once again, you can force yourself. Kant in some lecture says that a fitting symbol for virtue is the Greek myth of Hercules, who in one of his famous 12 labors that he did had to fight the Hydra, this special dragon or snake, where when you cut off one head, two new heads will grow, right? And this, Kant says, is a good symbol of virtue, because you have Hercules or Heracles, this mighty, strong hero, this warrior. He represents virtue. And then the monster, the Hydra, represents our drives, our sensuality, our inclinations that might pull us towards doing evil deeds. And the fight is never done, right? You can't stop being a hero. You can't rest at some point. Whenever you fight off one of your desires, one of your inclinations, two new ones arise. So you always need to stay being virtuous. You always need to stay being in a constant fight with yourself, so to say. That is, once again, why God is not virtuous. He's simply good. He has nothing to fight. But for us, goodness is virtue, Kant says. And this difference between autonomy and autocracy is also why two persons could have an equally good will. Because, I mean, there's not a better and a worse will. You either have the good will or you don't, but there's not degrees of goodwill. So, in the supersensual realm, the will as such could be equally good, but in the realm of appearance and the sensual realm, one person could appear as better, doing more good deeds than the other, because he has more virtue, he has more strength in actually enacting his goodwill. So, of course, it is important to once again stress that you must not look at this as some sort of tug of war between the will and the sensuality, where sensuality is just too strong and overwhelms the will. Rather, that strength, that virtue comes from the good will itself. If you really have the good will, and if you don't give in out of this radically evil propensity to just rather lie to yourself and just rather accept non-moral maxims, then you will be fine. But to Kant, the point is that we can have a good will, but we cannot have a holy will. Holiness for Kant, as opposed to virtue, describes a being which has no temptations at all, which doesn't just want the good, but cannot want anything but the good. So for a holy being, Kant says, there is no moral law really. There is no shall, no ought. Rather, every ought is too late. Whenever the moral law were to say, you ought, the holy being could reply, I already want. What we should do is what we already want to do. That is the case for God. But Kant would say that for human beings, the highest ideal that we can strive for is the ideal of virtue or of wisdom, not the ideal of holiness. Of course, any ideal, I discussed that in the lecture on what is reason, any ideal as such can never be reached. So you can also not be a fully virtuous, a fully wise person, but at least you can strive for it and you can get ever closer. While holiness is something that is simply beyond possibility for human beings. And the difference to Kant, so if you think of both ideals, the example of the fully virtuous, the fully wise person would be Socrates for Kant, and the example of the fully holy person, the saint, would of course be Jesus. And Kant would stress that the difference between the wise person, the sage, who is virtuous, and the holy person, the saint, is not an objective one. It's not that the saint is even better than the sage, is doing even more good, because both are the ideal of a completely good person, and you cannot be better than good. So both would act in exactly the same manner. Both would be equally good objectively. Both would be a person who completely fulfills the moral law. But subjectively, they are different because the wise person, he is good, but he still has the propensity for evil. He's still capable of stopping to be good and of becoming evil, and that is why he needs virtue, why he needs to be in constant fight with himself. While the holy person is not just objectively good, but also subjectively. There's nothing in him pulling him in another direction. He has no fight that he needs to put up. He simply is the way he is. And Kant would say that this holiness cannot be reached for humans. This is maybe something where he's a little inconsistent still, where he's still stuck a bit on this second level of consciousness, the level of lower morality. Fichte would go on to say that on the third level, the level of higher morality, that the Schal, the orc, can become a want, can become one, can become more than just a commandment that you force yourself to submit to, can become what you actually want. But anyways, for Kant, the highest ideal is wisdom, is virtue, not holiness that we can reach. And this is important. This leads me to why this teaching of the radical evil really matters to Kant. I said in the lecture on the imperatives that to Kant there can only, when it comes down to it, there can only be two practical principles. You either follow a doctrine of wisdom, that would be a true moral philosophy, or you follow a doctrine of prudence, and that would be a philosophy that is about happiness. That would be the principle of eudaimonism. And Kant says that here lies the cardinal error of the ancient moral theories. Kant was influenced by the ancients. Even in the school days, when he learned Latin, he had to read Latin classics, and he read many of the classic Latin authors, and he could quote them even in old age, and he greatly respected many of them, and he certainly has been influenced by them, particularly the Stoic authors. And there certainly is a good deal of let's say, Stoic sentiment in Kant's moral philosophy. There's many aspects in which his moral philosophy is close to Stoicism, but it's not the same. And one cardinal error, he says, that stopped them from becoming true moral theories, true doctrines of wisdom, that condemned them to really be doctrines of prudence, that are about happiness, that condemned them to mix that happiness and morality, right? That's what they did in antiquity. And what all these different schools in antiquity did, whether you look at the Stoics or the Epicureans or the Cynics or Aristotle, they all in one way or another care about happiness. And they all in some manner say that being moral is what leads you to happiness, or maybe the other way around, doing what makes you happy is what makes you lead a virtuous life. And Kant says this is an error. He says that their basic opinion was that, sure, we have sensual drives that might become a problem, but all we really need to do is be stronger than them, and is to discipline our nature. And this is something where they all in some manner agreed, right? Not just the Stoics agreed that we need to discipline our nature, the Epicureans did too, right? Against the cliche, the Epicureans were not about mindless hedonism, but more about prudent hedonism, right? Saying that you mustn't sacrifice all your other goals and well being for one passion. Like, it's not prudent to get drunk today and then tomorrow wake up with a headache. Rather, drink in moderation so you can enjoy it a bit, but you will also enjoy the next day. And this is therefore what the morality of antiquity, since it was more teachings of prudence, according to Kant, what it was mainly about: moderation, temperance, um, disciplining your animal drives, disciplining your passions, so that they would not ruin your life in the end. And to be sure, this also makes you, in many cases, act like a good person, but it's not enough, Kant says. And here he credits Christendom with first having introduced into thinking that idea that then could be picked up by philosophy afterwards. That idea that no, it's not just that we have to be stronger than our drives and that we have to discipline ourselves. Rather, the true enemy is much deeper. The true enemy is at the roots. There really is a deep rottenness. There is a radical evil in the human being. Of course, in the tradition that has been described as original sin and described with the myth of Adam and Eve eating the fruit of the tree. But the important point is this understanding that, yes, even a person who outwardly is innocent, right? Like they would say that even the children, they are born with original sin already. It's not just about your deeds. It's not just about your drives pulling you into a direction, making you greedy, making you lustful or whatever, and needing to be reined in. But rather, even when you are innocent, even if you have done no outwardly evil action so far, you still have this propensity for evil. You still have this ability and readiness to give in to your drives and to lie to yourselves about it. And this is the true enemy, Kant says. This evil at the root is what we have to fight first. And he therefore likes this expression in the Bible and the tradition that we have to die in the flesh and be reborn in spirit. And therefore, this teaching of the radical evil is important and is what really concludes moral philosophy and what really makes it moral philosophy. Otherwise, it would stay at the level of a philosophy of happiness, a philosophy of prudence. Only with this teaching of radical evil does it become a true philosophy of wisdom, a true philosophy of morality. Because only with that do you understand that you don't just have to restrain your drives a bit, you don't just have to outwardly act decently and not hurt somebody, but rather you have to constantly, and you have to never stop with this, you have to constantly remain self-critical and critically reflect, what is my will? Do I really have a good will? Or am I lying to myself here? Am I maybe doing good deeds, but for some other reasons? Or am I maybe telling myself, justifying to myself, rationalizing to myself that what I'm doing is good when it really isn't? This radical evil, if we are not aware of that, if we don't treat that as the true enemy that we have to fight when we want to be moral, um, then it won't work. Then we won't really be moral. And that is why only through this teaching, this is why it's so important, only through this teaching can the philosophy of prudence become the philosophy of wisdom. My deep thanks be to my supporters, Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Claufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.